Tonight, we'll go back in time to seasons past when 22 men graced the rugged fields of yesterday, fighting for one more first down, one more yard gain, one final score, which would bring victory after 60 minutes of battle on the gridiron. Tonight, we'll explore the world of gridiron greats. Welcome to Gridiron Greats Football History and its Memorabilia on the Sports History Network in conjunction with Swick Enterprises. And we're live from the Southport, North Carolina home of Gridiron Greats Magazine. I'm Bob Swick, publisher and editor of Gridiron Greats Magazine, and I'll be your host for the show. Gridiron Greats is the only publication in America that focuses upon the history and memorabilia of the North American football game since its inception in 1869. We cover 150 plus years of football, history, and memorabilia, and you can find us on the web at gridirongreatsmagazine.com. It is at this time I'd like to introduce my co-host, the senior contributing writer to Gridiron Greats Magazine, a football memorabilia historian, specializing in pre-World War II items, in particular Red Grange, and also Seattle Seahawk items, in particular Steve Largent. He hails from Portland, Oregon, Mr. Joe Squires. Joe, welcome to the show.
Good morning and afternoon to you, Captain. I will admit, a decade of your preamble, and I'm still expecting Wallingford, Connecticut in there. So I know it's been a year, 18 months you've lived there?
No, actually, it's interesting you bring it up. Tomorrow's our third anniversary of our closing on the house. So we actually been down here almost 3.5 years because we were 6 months in that condo renting the building, and tomorrow's our third year. So we're debating whether we're going to go out and celebrate or not, and I haven't decided yet one way or the other. We've been hanging low for January. We also had 2 inches of snow and ice here.
Oh, interesting.
Last week, so there were 3 days we were not able to back out of the house here because they have no snow removal equipment here down.
Yeah.
So this was the first snow in 8 years they had. And it was if it just snowed, it would have been all right, but then it froze.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of ice to the week. So we were here inside Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We didn't get out till Friday, where mostly everybody in Southport and Oak Island, went on the road to get out of the house type of thing. But it's fine now. It's getting warmer, and over the weekend we should hit 70 again, be more normal. But it was interesting. It reminded me of the Wallingford compound. However, back there, we would just hop in the 4-wheel drive RAV and go down the street to the local restaurant we ate at and see the locals there and eat and go trudge home type of thing. Here?
I think I told you this once, but when I was in the Navy, I did my nuclear power school training in Orlando. And I'm there with a bunch of guys, and every couple months we'd have a long 3-day weekend, and you just have guys who live in various places, Miami, Georgia, et cetera. And we'd take a long weekend and just go visit the parents' house. So not uncommon for 4 of us to pour into a car, drive 10 hours, to South Carolina and crash the weekend and come back Sunday afternoon. And South Carolina, I told my wife, Stacy, when we got married, I'm like, there's just a couple places I'd like to live outside of, the Pacific Northwest, Portland, where I grew up, and South Carolina was one of them. I was just thought it was so beautiful, Yeah.
Well, senior contributing writer John Spano has his summer home there in Pawleys Island, and I know at some point he'll be moving down there permanently. So he's like a mere hour and a half, actually almost 2 hours from where we are, and we try to hook up when he's down here at least once and visit.
Cool.
South Carolina's a real nice state. This is a nice state. Georgia's a nice state. Parts of Florida are a nice state. So, it's a big country. It's 50 states. It's, especially when I moved from an 8-mile radius of 62 years of 3 homes in basically one town, the town next to it, and 2 homes in that town, and that's it. So
I don't know why, but I was kicking around. We're a little off script here, but I over the weekend, I was like, how did Bob and Brenda come up with South Carolina? I mean, how did you choose moving from so long in Connecticut, just South Carolina?
Well, we had been looking down here, and we're in North Carolina, not South
Carolina.
Carolina.
No, excuse me. Sorry.
So we're, when we were saying when we retire, we really didn't want to retire in Connecticut because of the weather. and a few other reasons. So we started looking around. We have friends of ours who actually moved to the development we lived in. They told us about it. So we actually started looking in 2016 at property down here, and then on and off, on and off. Then finally 2020, we made the decision. Brenda got let go from her job in 2019. So she's basically been retired since then. So she said, let's just try this. So bought the property and built the house. Unfortunately, we built the house at the height of the pandemic. So that was an interesting experience. But anyways, that's why we settled here. But again, everything changes. So this may not be our forever home. It may be, may not. It is what it is. So we can always hop on a plane and be in Connecticut in 2 hours. So it's not a big deal, handle what we got to handle there.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what made me think of it over the weekend.
A lot of people say the same thing because they feel I was Mr. Wallingford, Connecticut in a lot of ways. And
yeah.
The high school I went to was in North Branford, Connecticut, which is the town next to Wallingford. So I basically went from my parents' house in North Branford to the first house in Wallingford, and then to the second house in Wallingford with Brenda in my second marriage. So that's basically what happened. So 8-mile radius I lived in, and then I moved halfway across the country, down south.
Halfway across the eastern seaboard.
Eastern seaboard.
Yep.
Yes. And we probably would have ended up in Florida if we found something we liked, but we couldn't find anything, and the prices were just astronomical at the time we were looking. So,
well, that surprises me.
So, well, we were looking Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater area. So,
yeah. Classic retirement community. Yes, retirement areas, not communities. Yeah.
Brenda's father's side of the family is still down there, so that's why we were going to move closer to them. But here's what it is. I plan on seeing them in May anyway, so we'll check out Tampa now 5 years later than before. We got an open forum, and Joe, I'm going to hand off to you immediately. Oh, that looks familiar.
Look at this.
Gridiron.
I don't know about, well, Bob, you don't get the euphoria that the rest of us do of going to your mailbox and looking in there and seeing Swick Enterprises in the upper left-hand corner. I've talked about it before, but it's like the movie Christmas Story, where the kid's looking for his Yoo-hoo, chocolate decoder ring. And there's a really funny little scene where he runs to the mailbox and his decoder ring is in there. And he takes that and throws the rest of it back in the mailbox and then runs inside. And it's just such a subtle little jab is, I don't care about this crap. This is my Yoo-hoo decoder ring. Well, Swick Enterprises is my Yoo-hoo decoder ring. And when I open up the mailbox, or when Stacy gets the mail and I see sitting on the kitchen counter, Swick Enterprises, that classic innocuous white envelope. It is, as I've said, Christmas come early at the old Squire house. What an amazing, and I love these. And I always just read them front to back. And then I go back and I look at my favorites, or reread my favorites. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you before, but I absolutely love your editor's page.
Thank you.
Always from the heart. I love, I love when you give me a shout out in there. You're always so kind, and it's from the heart. It is you just typing away and going for it.
I really, I believe in what I'm writing, and I really have to thank everybody, in this, journey of our magazine and of the podcast and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Because, it's as much as we measure things in dollars and cents, it's not always dollars and cents. And anybody who knows me knows with the magazine, it's not a winning proposition in a lot of ways. So, it is what it is. And I appreciate the ability to keep the word of the game alive. And as we, chatted beforehand, there's really nothing for the collector out there to read.
Totally.
And, you got Sports Collectors Digest with the once in a while feature. You got Sports Collector Daily with a once in a while feature, but there's nothing there that really focuses upon the history of the game, memorabilia of the game, collectors of the game, so on and so forth. We're a vast hobby. We're just not some PSA 10 card for, $1,000 type of thing, with the
Yeah.
kid walking around with his little suitcase.
Briefcase, suitcase, yeah.
So, there's a lot more to the hobby the way it is. And again, we are, as much as we have some young readers, we still have a lot of, older readers who, appreciate looking at it and viewing the game in that perspective, not just in, I got to buy a wax box and I got to pay for a rip and I've got to get my team out of it. And if no cards are good, then I'll just throw them out and that's it, type of thing. And
Yeah.
that brings me up to one real aside that popped in my mind. I was going to say it. I did a show a few weeks ago in Wilmington, and no lie, I got out of my table. I was walking around the show, and I ran to the men's room, and I came back. On the little front table as you walked in, somebody did exactly that. They broke open like 20 packs of, I don't even know what it was, newer cards, football, and just left them on the table, and that was it. And
They're
I'm
after the chase card. They're after
there was a
the
dealer
one
right
of
there.
one.
And I said,
Yeah.
what was that? He said, some guy he broke a box. He took cards he wanted and he left the rest there. I mean, the wrappers were every which way, the boxes every, and I'm saying to myself, wow, is this classless if there ever was? Why would you, to me, that's an abuse of the hobby. I really feel that way. I've seen it at the National too many times where I saw guys opening up packs and throwing the cards in the waste in the garbage pail right there. That was horrible.
Well, it's a two-way street for that abuse. So I 100% agree with you, Captain. But I mean, the hobby, the manufacturers have driven it to that.
Oh
It's
yeah,
blaster
I
packs
don't
with
deny
chase
that at all.
cards and one of ones, and prism refractor, black border,
Yeah,
etc. So I mean, there's a set, but there's a dozen chase cards. I mean, and everything else is useless, and
right,
that's the sad part.
right, right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned that, I mean, that's what popped in my mind, and I can visually see, and it was a 2-day show. So when I come in on
Yeah.
Sunday morning, the mess is still there. So
The dealer didn't even clean it up.
no, nobody cleaned it up. So I took the wrappers, I put them in a tall pile. I put all the cards together, I put it in a tall pile, and then by the end of the day, everything was gone. So I don't know if somebody just threw them out or if some kids, because there were a lot of kids at the show. Some kids actually just picked it up, or even a dealer picked it up, type of thing.
Yeah.
And
Well,
what's the point of this?
the price of the blaster packs has gone up. I mean, in 79, 78, 70, I bought a few wax packs in 78, but 79 was the big one.
Yeah,
A pack is a quarter.
right.
And you could open them and you could get, your cards and you could see the players on TV.
Yeah,
Whoever was playing, I used to set the cards out in front of
yeah,
me and, oh, Roger Staubach, I've got that card and Terry
yeah,
Bradshaw. Oh,
yeah,
and my dad used to love it. Even in 78, a buck was money, but it
right,
wasn't something, it wasn't a backbreaker. And
right.
now you take, the big chase, blaster packs. I mean, $100, $500. I mean, it's out of reach of the youth, and that's the tough part. So I mean, the manufacturers have done it to
Yeah,
themselves,
yeah. And again, I went to the show, and I'm looking around, and one guy had, I think it was 1989 Bowman baseball for $50 a box. And I said, that's worth $50 a box? And he said, well, he's naming off the rookies. And I said, I can remember they couldn't give them away for $5 a box in 90 and 91 because it was junk wax. And I just I should be able to understand it because there's people, who weren't even born, when they were open. So they don't have any concept of buying those packs at 50 cents a pack back then. You know what I mean? I'm working in a card shop. I see it every day, literally the days I was working there, that these are 50-cent packs. They're worthless at the end of the season. The owner of them says, let's blow them out for a quarter a pack. Let's, keep 10 boxes in the back. I want all the cases out, blah, blah, blah. Or $5 a box, and that's it. After you pay $10.80 a box for them, So
Well, I've shared before the story. There's a guy on the old CU threat chat rooms who lived in Seattle who was selling, I don't remember how many it was, but call it 200 1988 Topps football wax boxes.
Yeah.
And he's like, I want $5 each. But then shipping was $6
Yeah.
and wrap it and stuff. And I'm like, well, hey, I live in Portland, 3 hours south of you. Meet me at a city called
Yeah.
Centralia. That is the exact midpoint between Portland and Seattle. Like,
Yeah.
meet me in Seattle and I'll give you your $5.
Yeah.
And met him. I took my Ford Bronco and I didn't realize how much room
20 cases.
200 boxes put up. And even just putting him in the back of my Ford Bronco, I remember I'm like, wow, that's a lot. So when I was after an all PSA 10 88 set,
Yeah.
so I opened probably 15, 20 boxes and then I saved the rest.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely started selling them for $5 a box and open it. And I ran out at some point.
Yeah.
Fast forward about 10 years, and those same boxes are now 130,
Yeah. Yeah.
$150.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even 88 tops found found its sunny
And
spot.
and those were so plentiful, it wasn't even funny. I mean,
Yeah.
it just blows my mind. Blows my
Yeah.
mind.
But going back to us,
Yes, go back.
GG, for again, to repeat, I love, absolutely love the editor's page, and I can just see you typing it away. I mean, how before you print, how soon before you print do you write that, or is it something you work on for a month or so?
Yeah, it usually is a 2 to 4 week time frame, and we try to get everything laid out, which takes a good 7 to 10 days to get it correct the way we want it. And then I always have, there may be like a paragraph or two I don't like. I'll rewrite it, and then we gotta relay it out. Brenda has to relay it out and refit it, so on and so forth. So I try to get it as close to as good as possible. Now, unless something pressing really comes up out of the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere, and then I gotta alter it. But we're always working on, for our audience to know, we're always working on GG. It's a year round job, even though we only publish quarterly. I got a few articles for the next issue already. I'm doing some roughs already. I'm getting some ideas of what I want to do, so on and so forth. And it's a year-round job. That's what
Yeah.
it is, basically.
By the way, the rest of us hobbyists, in the VFC community, refer to Brenda as the smart swick. Um, this article by Harv Aronson, "The Birth of the
Yeah.
NFL," was incredible.
Yeah.
That's one that I went back and read twice. Just the photos,
Yeah.
the postcards, the schedules. I love the winning team,
Yeah.
the win loss columns,
Yeah.
the little
Yeah.
anecdotes in there mentioning the teams. That was really well done. I really liked that one. And then obviously, well, I don't want to cue anyone out, but not include anyone, but this one by Jared Krause, the one of a kind.
Yeah.
Jared has been on the program before. He's also shared, a theft that he had where somebody broke into his house and stole some cards.
Yeah.
This 1986 Elway Dairy Pack card. I used to collect Joe Montana cards,
Yeah.
and I can remember chasing that one.
Yeah.
The 87 and the 88, Elway, or, the fast pack cards. I had
Yeah.
to chase one of those for my Steve Largent set. So I know I know the pain in tracking those down.
Yeah.
And I can remember finding a guy who had a wax pack, or no, excuse me, it had a box,
Yeah. Pack.
with the entire, 88, fast pack set, and met him at the National, handed him $200, opened it, pulled the Largent out, the only one I was missing from my master set,
Yeah.
went and got it graded, and then brought the rest to, somebody's table, and, here you go, here's, and
Yeah.
then, so I dig those, and Jared obviously has sketched many front covers of GG. Again, the community you talk about, from
Yeah.
people writing articles to artwork to your brother-in-law printing, and just a community effort to put together an amazing magazine. But
Thank you.
love it, and I always dig your book reviews. I think our readers have that. Where the hell did this come from?
That was actually my niece drew that many
Oh,
years ago.
really?
Yeah, so it just stuck. So we keep it in there.
There's so many little nuances to the magazine that I'm
And
sure a lot of people have wanted to know, Oh, by the way, I don't know about you, but do you remember the gentleman who put these NFL calendars together?
yeah, Miles. Yeah, Miles Causing, who was on our show a while back.
He mailed me one of the calendars. I just got it in the mail
Yep,
probably a couple weeks ago,
yep,
but just out of the blue. I
yep.
thought that was really, really kind of him.
I
Uh,
I know he was sending it to you. Sadly, the Canadian Post Office was on strike for almost 6 weeks. So a lot of his mailings got a little backed up there.
yeah,
So
yep. December of 2024.
yep,
My favorite. I love
yep.
it. And my birthday's in December, so I can't help but think that he put Red Grange in December as a nod to me, selfishly. So, well, we'll see. Just let me keep on thinking about that. But great magazine. The community owes the Swick family a thank you, for
Thank
putting
you.
together something great. And it is a labor of love. I know we've talked about it.
It's a lot of work, and like I said, it's it's not uh, uh, as profitable as I would like it to be. But again, it's not all about dollars and cents.
Yep.
But also realizing my lifespan, I will try to go on as long as I can with it. But at some point, I know I will stop it, and it is what it is. That's it.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of our podcast is Bob and I texting back and forth or emailing variations of the agenda, what we talk about. And at one point, last weekend, I was telling you, once a year, I have a good friend named Barry who puts together this thing called Dad's Weekend.
Hmm.
And it's 13 dads and 20 kids, get together and rent this huge, 4-level lodge up at Mount Hood, here in Oregon. And there's one rule, and that is no moms. Uh, and so the kids love it. They go up there, ice cream, for breakfast. We go sledding. We go sledding all day. Can I stay up till midnight? Absolutely. Play poker both nights. It's a fun weekend.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but my friend Barry, I've known for quite a few years, and he's not a collector, but he listens to our show on occasion. And so he'll text me like, hey, can you send me a picture of that card you were talking about or something like that? And
yeah.
his dad is a huge Seahawks fan. Well, he and I were playing poker, and he's like, how do you guys come up with the topics for some of your shows? And I'm like, well, I've got a huge advantage. Bob, is a historian of the collecting in the NFL. So I mean, a lot of it is me listening. I mean, you can prime the pump with a question and talk for 10 minutes on it. I'm like, take a topic we were just discussing on VFC, and it's the best quarterback, because my son
Yeah,
asked me, if Patrick Mahomes wins one more Super Bowl, will he be one of the best quarterbacks ever? And I'm like, well, they're best ever. Mahomes has 3 Super Bowl rings. He's been there 4 times, so that means he'll have 4 Super Bowl rings. He'll be 4 for 5. There's quite a few quarterbacks who've won 4.
right,
Mahomes Montana. I'm like, and being 4 for 4 is better than 4 for 5. I'm like, but then you have to go back into different eras. You have to talk about Otto Graham. You have to talk about
yeah,
Unitas, Bart Starr. I'm like, I go, and do you remember when we did the Hall of Fame dinner last year? And I asked like Dan Fouts and Drew Bledsoe who the best player they ever faced was. And Dan Fouts is like Lawrence Taylor. He's like, what he did to me on the football field would be considered assault if he did it to me on the streets.
yeah,
And
yeah,
he was like, hey, Bledsoe, no offense, but there's a lot of rules about quarterback protection by the time you hit the NFL,
right.
that weren't in place when I was. And there's so many photos of Y.A. Tittle kneeling with blood coming out of his ear, and just quarterbacks getting the crap kicked out of them. So I also
Right.
explained that to Xander, to my son Xander. Like, there's different eras. Yeah, you almost have to break it up in different eras, because like Tom, there's a reason 5,000 yards now is the benchmark. Where
Right.
it wasn't back then. It's just it's a much more prolific offensive game than it was then.
Right. Right.
Receiver.
It's all offense today. I mean,
Yeah.
the NFL really feels that's what drives the game, not realizing classic football to me is a chess match between two coaches and 22 players to try to gain the advantage. That to me is long gone. It's only you see it sometimes in a college game or a high school game.
Yeah.
You don't see it in
Yes.
an NFL game. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, and I was just, I mean, talking about like Lester Hayes and how he would maul wide receivers going across, disrupting patterns. And then they started putting in 5 yard protection, or 5 yards is the only time you can touch court. ESPN used to have that jacked up, thing at the end where they'd show people, players running across the field and then, defensive players just
Right.
and then five would be like jacked up. Well,
Yeah.
now all of that is illegal. That's a
Right. Penalty.
that's a personal foul.
Yeah.
That's what used to be a glorified series on ESPN is now against the rules. So I mean
Right.
that right there. I mean, and for the better, you don't want a wide receiver running across the field looking at a pass and then turning around and getting folded in half by a defender who's got his
Right.
eye on him the whole time. I mean, these are to protect the players. But, so explaining to him just the different eras and, how an Otto Graham played in a different NFL than Unitas. And I'm like, most historians agree, you can't say the best ever. Although Tom Brady is the best ever. Jerry Rice is the best ever. But it gets very subjective when you start getting into eras. I'm like, you're almost breaking it into eras. You've got your Otto Grahams, and somebody brought up Benny Friedman, Unitas, Starr, Bobby Lane, Sammy Baugh, and then you move into your, Joe Theismann, Dan Fouts, Jim Plunkett, 2 Super Bowl wins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl, probably one of the best to ever lace him up. But
Right.
he was bumping into the NFL at the same time as Jim Kelly's and Elway's, and Montana is phasing out Young's.
Well, that's the key to me to the quarterback position. You're measured today more than any other time in the history of the game of how many championships you've won, how many Super Bowls you've won. Now, how many Super Bowls you played in, how many Super Bowls you won. Look at Fran Tarkenton, prime example. There's a lot of quarterbacks that never won the big game, but they were great quarterbacks. There's nothing you can do about it, and each has their own niche in the sport. I think Brady, by far and wide, is light years ahead in what he's done, but also Brady is Brady, and meaning that is, and it'll be something we're going to talk about. He wants the call to go his way, so he worked the psychology into the refs, into the other team. You don't touch me. I'm better than everybody. I'm a winner. You're not a winner. You're on the other side of the field. Blah blah blah. That kind of thing. And I mean, that happens. That's inevitable. And you can't deny it that he was, a great quarterback, and again, he had that bad season after the Super Bowl. Why did you hang around? Because you really still thought you were going to do another bowl, and you didn't. You didn't have the talent. You didn't have the talent with you to carry the whole team to win. That's what it comes down to. So, that's a good point. And again, getting back to, like what we're talking about, yeah, there are different eras, and I've always said this for eras for football cards. To me, you have a pre-World War II section of 1894 to roughly 1939, 1940 for football cards. Then you have after post-World War II, then you have basically 1946 to 1988, or if you want to be more specific, 1948 to 88, when the Bowman 48s came out. Up to the 88 Tops, you had the massive explosion in football, good or bad, 1989. The football market's never been the same since then. So you could then put in a third era of basically 1989, roughly to 2001, 2002, or if you want to stretch it to the last year of Tops, 2015. And then 2016 is just Panini, Panini, Panini. And it is what it is. It's a crapshoot of everything that they can put out at any time, at any price they want, and either open them or don't. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. the junk wax here. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm personally dying to go to the grocery store and go in the cereal aisle or go to the snack food aisle and see so and so card. I don't care what the sport is. So and so's card is in this box. You know what I mean? Because I would, even
Yeah.
if I didn't eat the cereal, I would buy it just to get the card out. And
Yeah.
you just don't see anything like that anymore.
So, best quarterback of the era. Uh, and then circling back, I was just telling my friend about just the topic of best quarterback of the era, how Xander asked me. And then you go down this rabbit hole of, well, that's a very subjective, will Patrick Mahomes be one of the top three quarterbacks? I don't know. There's a lot of people who could raise their hand, and and he makes fun of me for bringing up Autogram. I'm like, Autogram was legit. Let's talk about the
Right,
AFL,
right,
the,
right,
or the
exactly.
the AFC, and then there's all these mergers, and
The one thing,
and
the one thing I like about Mahomes, and I've always liked it about him, he's very calm on the field. He's not a whiner. He's not a complainer. He just goes out. If he's got to come in on the fourth down, he comes in. He's got to figure out what he did wrong. And that's what it really comes down to. So he's a no nonsense quarterback who has a lot of skills around him. And as much as Kansas City's now the most hated team because everybody believes they have every call in the book goes to them. And I'm not going to deny anything about that one way. I'm not even going to go down there because to me, refereeing in NFL this season was probably at one of the poorest levels I've ever seen in all the years I've watched football. And I've watched football since my first games I can remember in 1965. So I have watched for a long period of time. I remember one time referees were spot on. They were able to make calls. I don't understand why today they have so many problems other than they have to understand on a split second the decision they make according to the rule they want to call on it. And again, seeing a couple of these personal fouls, seeing these roughing the passers, seeing this intentional grounding, blah, blah, blah. I don't comprehend how you can make decisions like that. But
well, Captain, it's also under a lot more scrutiny. I mean,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
the refs weren't perfect back then. I can think of a dozen calls that are still talked about
Oh
today.
yeah, yeah.
But
I don't deny
but
that, but
there wasn't 20 high def cameras, you know, catching and pylon cameras and first down marker cameras. There wasn't all these high def cameras catching every
right,
angle. An aerial camera that on wires comes in right above the line of scrimmage.
right,
20 high def cameras checking every angle. So there's a flag and there's a challenge, and in that 2 minutes, we've seen 10 angles of high def on slow mo.
right,
Us at home are able to scrutinize it a lot more than back then when it was four cameras, one of them mounted to the back of a pickup truck that drove along the sidelines.
right,
you know
right.
you,
No,
you,
I agree with
you
that.
know
But I just feel, actually to rephrase what I'm saying, I just feel the NFL really needs to understand, if you're going to be this, and you are now a betting business, I don't care what
yes,
anybody says, you're
yes,
worried about the spreads and everything. If
yeah.
you're going to be a betting business, then maybe you should just go high tech completely, take the refs off the field, and let computers decide. They have the final say on it, and that's it. You know.
Well, there's a lot of. I was at a Portland Blazer game on Monday, and both teams challenged fouls, defensive fouls in red, and both were overturned.
Okay.
And I was like, it's tough that you have to review those and they're overturned. And I'm like, there's subjectivity. And baseball's done a good job of you can review that,
Right.
but also there's some things that aren't reviewable. And people talk about putting a chip, in
Right.
football, but then you'd also have to coordinate that chip with when the player's knee touches the ground,
Right.
or elbow or hand or whatever. Are we putting sensors in the field that because for a chip to be in both noses of the ball, there also has to be something on the field that tells you when it
That's
comes in contact.
yeah.
uh, you know I,
That would
you
make
know
it more of a gladiator sport than actual,
yeah.
sport. That, and I get that too. So, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. It's frustrating. It's frustrating to older fans because we know what the game was like before. And it's, again, because now you have a 24/7 media that talks nonstop, that can never stop talking. They talk about the same thing over and over and over and over. I mean, to watch some of these sports shows, I can't take them anymore
Yeah.
because,
And it's their job to stir that pot.
exactly. And that's all they're doing.
But there's a lot of fun, people on, Twitter or, other social media that, create this content where, it's like Patrick Mahomes, the guy, and then they ad lib in referees'
Yeah.
voices where it's like, penalty breathing on Patrick Mahomes, defensive player will be ejected from the game and publicly executed, after the game. You can't touch, our Lord Mahomes, all right, 20 points have been awarded and Chiefs ball, it's,
Yeah.
and they're in jest, but, Super Bowl coming up. We're going to talk about our Super Bowl, but one of the topics we wanted to discuss was are the referees biased to Patrick Mahomes, or is that perceived or fabricated? I mean, does it go both ways?
To me, because they're on TV all the time,
Yeah.
I think it becomes more of an issue, seeing some of the bad calls. I think if you watch a lot of other games and if you watch a lot of different teams' games, you see the same consistency in what you want to call the bad calls. So I don't really think, I think, again, that's the media stirring the pot, because they don't want to see Mahomes with the third ring for whatever reason. They don't want us repeat. And, my gut feeling is they're going to win again because they found a way through the entire season, to overcome, whatever, obstacles in front of them. And they are back in 3 years in a row. And to me, they're basically, a dynasty team if I ever saw one. So,
Yeah.
Andy Reid is a good coach. Andy Reid took a long, long path to become a good coach, but he finally found what he needed in Kansas City, and he was able to nurture that group of players and make them win, type of thing. And I'm happy for Andy because I know he's had a lot of personal issues in his lifetime with his sons. I feel sorry for the guy. He's the same age as me, but I'm happy for him. I'm glad for him. Philadelphia to me comes off very, very cocky, very, very self-assured, and they come off very, they got the chip on their shoulder. I get it. I mean, you play into that area, that type of situation. But can they win the big game? Just like Detroit this past season. I really thought Detroit was going to be in the Super Bowl, but they just basically collapsed.
Yeah.
Got
gutted by injuries. Gutted by injuries.
Yeah. So you get hit by injuries. Okay, so where's your second team coming up that has to play like a first team? That's what they're trained there for the season. It's easy to say we got injuries. Well, you got to pick it up. You got to play better again. That type of thing. So, anyways, I don't. I think it's overblown, and I think we're going to see a real good game. I think we're going to see a high scoring game too.
Me too.
But I do think in the final analysis, the red of the Chiefs are going to be putting the rings on their fingers after the game. I think they're going to take a third vote, and I think they're a true dynasty team, and Mahomes is really in his element with the fourth ring.
No doubt they are a dynasty like we've never seen. A dynasty. I say dynasty as a joke. I like to play around with my kids.
Right.
But I mean, there were a couple bad calls in that AFC Championship.
Oh yeah, I don't deny that. I don't.
That first down call by Josh Allen, I don't think he made it. And I've seen people play angle after angle. I'm like, I don't think he made it. And by the way, don't leave it on the field. It's that, Bart Starr, in the Ice Bowl where it's like, give me the ball. Lombardi, it's like, if we can't score 1 yard, we don't deserve to be here. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but safe. Don't leave it up to the refs.
Right.
On that, get the first down.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, but there was a pass to a Chiefs wide receiver down there that ended up in the defender's arm. And then as they're rolling to the ground, the ball obviously touched the ground and then ended up in the receiver's arms. And it's not an interception. To me, that's an incomplete pass because you can see
Right.
the ball clearly touch ground, but it ends up being a first down, first and goal, Chiefs.
Right. Right.
And they reviewed that.
Right.
And to me, I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah, that's incomplete. You know,
Right. Right.
not a football. I don't know. And that was the one where I'm like, boy, that one, I don't get.
Right.
And that
I
was the
I
tough.
agree with you because that should have been incomplete pass, and that's it. You know, but
It's interesting because I was also laughing with some friends over the weekend. It's like, I've watched every Super Bowl. I had to go back and look every Super Bowl since 10. No, since Super Bowl 8. The Steelers and the Cowboys was
okay.
probably one of the first football games I ever watched.
Okay.
I can remember sitting and watching it with my dad. And I don't remember the ones before it, but that Steelers Dallas game was great. And I remember the Rams the next year. So, I mean, that's it. And I can remember Super Bowl, 11 with Jim Plunkett,
Yeah.
et cetera. So I've watched every Super Bowl since. And I was laughing to my friends. I'm like, I can't remember who won the Super Bowl 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of funny. And I consider myself a hardcore football fan.
Oh,
So,
I agree with that. And coming from somebody who's actually watched every game since the first game, remember it was called a World Championship game.
oh, look at you. AFL versus NFL.
This is Super Bowl II.
Yes.
Great. It's not in the greatest condition, but I did pick it up at a very reasonable price. So long story short, I'm only missing the one Super Bowl, the first Super Bowl program for the Packers. I have all the Packers Super Bowls, but here I don't know if you can see well here.
Yeah.
So this used to be press photos that were issued by the team sent to the media, and they also set it up for a classic drop into the Super Bowl program. And if you think about it, Super Bowl programs have advanced to their multimedia type of thing. So this is fast forward to the one Aaron Rodgers Super Bowl against the Steelers. This was the program from 45. And again, it's all glitz, it's all color pages, history of the game, so on and so forth. It's actually a nice discussion of the game, history of the game, so on and so forth. Then you go back to, and I don't have that many anymore of the real older programs, but I got a Super Bowl 22, which was the Redskins and the Broncos, and I think this was 1988. This is that particular program, and again, look at the back cover, the Marlboro Man cigarette ad. But again, it's the same setup. And what was nice in this program was a replay of the entire season. They did a nice recap of the program of the season itself. So it was a nice write up in that one. And then obviously the Packers played in Super Bowl 31 and 32.
Yep.
And these are the Pete Rozelle had just passed, so they had the emblem on the front cover for him. And 32, the infamous Elway victory over.
Yep, the infamous Elway victory.
So, the evolution of the program, which I've always found interesting, and over the years, I've collected, bought, sold many of the programs. I've always wanted just I'll keep all the Packer ones for my Packer collection. And I did get one from Nick Aguiletti from the Chiefs, the first Super Bowl they won. And unfortunately, I cannot put my finger on it before the show. So that I will promise next time I find it, I will just show it very briefly to see it, because he had a nice signature on the front cover. And I got that program also. So now I'm assuming you have your Seahawks program. of the Super Bowl?
I do, and a ticket stub. I didn't go, but I
Okay.
went. I actually have a program from the 2005, the Seahawks' first Super Bowl, the Hasselbeck and Sean Alexander era, because I had a friend who went to New York for that game and brought me back a program. And then you're going to laugh at this, but Brian Dwyer, who was, is now the president of REA,
Yeah.
used to do a side stint for Fox Sports,
Right.
when he wasn't. And so he was whatever, a key grip for Fox Sports at that Super Bowl. And he brought me back his press pass. So
Oh, cool.
talk about I knew him when. But yeah, Brian knew I was a Seahawks fan, and he was at the game working for Fox Sports, so he gave me his press pass, which is pretty cool. So I threw together a couple of stats that Jeff Payne, at VFC, corrected me on some of my voodoo math. So just a couple fun stats I liked. The most points scored in a Super Bowl is Super Bowl 24, where the 49ers dropped 55 on the Broncos, on Elway's Broncos.
Okay.
And I can remember that game. Jerry Rice, 3 touchdown passes. And like 7 of those points for the Broncos came late in the game, kind of sloppy. That was a dominant, game. And I can remember, watching that at home as, like I think I was 16 or 17 and just like, wow, that was a big one. I think it was 18 I can't remember, but I can remember. Yeah. Anyways, fun Super Bowl. So 55 is the most. The 49ers dropped on the Broncos way to the and that was the Broncos. I forgot about this. The Broncos appeared in 3 out of the 4 Super Bowls that year. Super Bowl 21, where they lost to the Giants, 22, where they lost to the Redskins, and then 24, where they got decimated by the 49ers. And then the Bills took over and lost the next 4. So I mean, 3 out of 4 for the Broncos in the AFC, and then 4 out of 4 losses for the Bills.
And one interesting note of that: 7 seasons, 2 teams only from the AFC.
Yes. And how many Super Bowls have there been? What are we at? 57, 58?
58.
And it is split. It is like oddly even. There's a lot of parity, you know. So out of the 58, call it, whatever it is, 29 and 29. I mean, I forget what the stat is, but it's oddly split.
Yeah.
And then you look at this and you're like, 8 years in a row, the AFC lost.
Right.
And, it just how dominant that was, but by the NFC. And it's not like one team ruled the NFC other than the Cowboys during that time.
Right. Right.
The Broncos lost to 3 different teams. Anyways,
and it's interesting to think about this, especially with the Super Bowl, and I think it goes along with any of the 4 professional team sports: football, baseball, basketball, or hockey.
Yeah,
the dynasty teams are just few and far between, and to me, I find it to be so special seeing a team that's now going to be in a 3rd in a row Super Bowl. I just think that's one of the most interesting things in sports history that you could possibly stumble upon. And looking at, especially in football, the real dynasty teams, the Steelers, you look at the 49ers, you look at the early Packers, you look at, other teams, the Patriots, you look at those teams, the dynasty teams, they put it together, so on and so forth, making them even more special by doing it year in and year out. I mean, think about it, especially in the NFL today, in 2025, to have 3 Super Bowl championship, 3 years in a row, 4 out of the 5 last years of being in the Super Bowl, it's just an amazing accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Highest scoring game was 75 points, Super Bowl 29. 49ers led by Steve Young at that time, 49, San Diego 26.
Yeah.
And that's Junior Seau, Steve Young, still, Jerry Rice in there. I can remember that one. That's the classic where Steve Young takes the monkey off his back.
Yeah.
He did
Yeah.
it. He did it on his own accord. Second place, that was 75 points. Second place was Eagles 41, Patriots 33 for 74.
Yeah.
That was Super Bowl 52. That's a pretty good one. Lowest scoring game. Thank you, Jeff, for correcting me. This is Super Bowl 53. It was Patriots 13, Rams 3, 16
Right.
points. I
Right.
can remember watching that one at my brother-in-law's house in Minnesota and literally falling asleep. Like,
Yeah.
this is
That was a snooze game if there ever was one. That had to
yeah,
have been, I hate to say it, it was one of the most boring games for a
yep,
championship game I ever watched. I mean, it just seemed like they were just totally ill prepared for each other's defenses to do anything offensively.
yeah. That was
But
Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley. One of the one of the most prolific runners. For the Rams. I
right.
mean, yeah. I don't know. Uh, the second place was Super Bowl 7, 21 points, Miami 14, Redskins 7. That was on the Dolphins on their way to 2 years in a row,
Right.
including that 72 season, undefeated season. Most dominant lopsided Super Bowl in point disparity was 45 points in Super Bowl 24. Again, the nod: 49ers 55, Broncos 10. 45-point blowout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. So
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting again, studying the Super Bowl, studying the championship game, even looking at the older championship games of the AFL, the AAFC, the early NFLs, how different it is today, the hype of it, so on and so forth. And again, I truly believe that, you're right in what you're saying with the 24/7 media. It stirs the pot nonstop. So we're going to just be inundated with the pro and the anti-Mahomes, the pro and anti-Chiefs, the pro and anti-Eagles, so on and so forth. And, got to let them play it out. And that's it. That's what it comes
yep,
down to.
yeah.
Simple.
Well, I love the Super Bowl. I love not having not having to pick a side. I
Yeah.
love dynasties. I'll be okay if Kansas City wins. I also love, I dig the Eagles. I don't know why. I just consider them to be America's team, and I love, I think Saquon Barkley going to the Eagles is a good thing. It'll be a nice middle finger to the Giants management staff if Saquon wins a Super Bowl with their division rival after being, basically the back turned, on public TV, to Saquon in the most unceremonious way, releasing one of the best running backs.
Yeah.
And
That to me is just total poor management on the part of the Giants. I mean, it defies logic. Their management team just defies logic to me. The ineptness of it, and it's sad. New York, and again, being there for so many years, I would read about it daily in my New York Post. The Jets and the Giants, two pathetic teams,
so bad.
with the exception of the Giants, with a few, winning years here and there. Giants being a better franchise than the Jets being just a road to nowhere. And I give Aaron Glenn a lot of credit for taking the job because he knows what he wants to do there. However, it's still the Jets. And again, he had a lot to work with Detroit. To me, in with the Jets now, he's got a lot less to work with. And I hate to say it, Rodgers is not the answer. They got to really look to something different. It'd be
Yeah.
interesting how it plays out.
Aaron Rodgers likely had his last snap in the NFL. Do you think he
Yeah,
retires this year?
I don't think he's going to be playing anymore. All right,
Yeah.
we got basically 2 minutes. 2-minute warning before we start. If you're not subscribed to Gridiron Greats Magazine, what are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for?
GridironGreatsMagazine.com. Joe, what'd you pick up on today's show?
Thanks for the calendar, Miles. Thank you. And thank you to the captain for being a stalwart of the industry.
Thank you.
I say it all the time. I've got the best seat in the house, just talking to you about topics we're gonna catch up on. I love sitting, in an interview when we have a guest and it's your turn to ask a question. You're asking in there, and I can just kind of glide in there with a little joke. I'm the comedic antidote to the show, I know, but I do have the best seat in the house, being able to talk hobby with the captain,
Good.
every other week. So
I'm glad you're my co-host, believe it or not, and I do appreciate everything you do. And you are the future of the hobby because you got a few years up. You got a few years less on me, so you're going to be taking over some of these roles in the future. But anyways, I reiterate, we're trying to keep the word of the game alive. We're trying to keep memorabilia alive, keep the history of the game alive. And we've been doing it for a long time, and hopefully we'll continue to do it down the road in the future even.
Yep.
All right, that's all I have. We actually have a couple of guests lined up. Again, it's going to be a question of timing, and then we'll get them on the show, and we'll be looking at their collections, and we'll move forward from there. Till next time, thanks for watching. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Ba 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 ba.